Welcome, Tami. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me. I've been looking forward to it.
Yes, me too. Well, why don't you? I always like to start by having people say a little bit about who you are and what got you to where you are today.
Oh, goodness. Well, since this is not a day-long podcast,
Yeah.
I'll tell you the short story. I'm just so who I am. I'm Tami Stackelhouse. I'm the founder of the International Fibromyalgia Coaching Institute. I've written a couple books on fibromyalgia. I am the executive producer of a fibromyalgia documentary called Invisible and host of the Fibromyalgia podcast. How I got here, really, I mean, you could probably guess I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia. I was one of those kids that was just like always sick. Like there was
Mhm.
always something wrong. My parents used to joke that they would take me to the doctor for maintenance because there was always something to fix. And they would take my sister to the doctor for repair because she was the tomboy that was like up breaking something.
Yes. That's great.
So it was actually quite a long road to
Mhm.
finally get my fibromyalgia diagnosis. My first chronic pain diagnosis came when I was a teenager. I had
Mhm.
chronic daily headaches, chronic migraines, and I remember that neurologist visit. It was also my first not so great doctor experience,
Mhm.
and I remember him looking at me and saying, "There's nothing wrong with you. You just have headaches." And I remember as a teenager just thinking, what? Like, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Like, isn't that something wrong? Like, how can it doesn't compute, right?
Such an odd thing to say.
Yeah, so, I mean, kicking that off, for
Mhm.
me, it took a while to really feel like there were people who could help me,
Mhm.
you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so many people and so many listeners can relate to having like this one doctor experience or this thing that is said to us that really impacts our lives and impacts us and can take us a while to move through. I had when I was a teenager when I had chronic knee pain and it was actually a physical therapist and I think I blocked it out. Otherwise, I'm like, I'm not sure if I would have gone to PT school had I connected this, but it was only in PT school that I connected this looked at me and was like, "Well, you have miserable posture syndrome and there's nothing you can do about it." And it was like when I was like sitting in class, like learning about like the female like body and how like our hips are wider and so it does create more like impact at the knees, but you can do something about it. I was like, that's what he meant. Because I remember Googling it when I was older and I was like, this isn't a thing. There's nothing called miserable posture syndrome, but it like stuck with me for years.
Oh my
It's like,
gosh, yeah.
damn. Anyways, go on. But like, yeah, it is. It's just like, what is this? It just brings up such a good question of like, what is this thing that someone has said to you that you were holding on to that like ultimately is like probably some like bullshit thing that they said that often
Totally.
it's such an
Yeah.
interesting comment about the headaches of like there's nothing wrong with you because it's like on one hand, I feel like when it's said in a certain tone or with a different energy, it can be like, "There isn't though, like, you you're here on this earth for a different reason, and you have different, like, things to tackle," right? Like, there's nothing inherently or spiritually
Right.
wrong with you, but I'm feeling that's not what he meant.
No, no, and I feel like he probably was saying, you're a healthy teenager,
Mhm.
right? You just happen to be having headaches. And
Yeah.
who knows, maybe that comment was more for my mom than it was for me with her standing
Mhm.
there, right? Like your kid doesn't have a brain tumor.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah,
You know,
totally.
but
Mhm.
but it's interesting how we hear that
Yes.
though.
Yes.
I mean, for me, it felt very dismissive, right? Like, "There's nothing wrong with you. You just have
Mhm.
headaches." That's the way that I heard it, and so, I mean, that might have even been the last time I saw him.
I would imagine
I
so,
mean,
yeah.
okay, I'm
Mhm.
not gonna get a lot of help here, so moving
Mhm.
on.
Understandably
So
so.
that was when I was in high school,
Mhm.
and so, the next few years were just, I mean, random, vague, hurting a little more, being more
Mhm.
tired, like nothing you could really put your finger on to say, "Oh, that's what's wrong with you."
Mhm.
Labs coming back normal, typical story, right?
Yep.
I remember even at one point messaging my doctor and saying, "Hey, could I have fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue?" And I remember I used the abbreviations for some of those, right? So
Mhm.
CFS/FMS was one of the things that was being used at the time, and and I was so encouraged to hear back from the nurse that she didn't know what that was, but she could
Wow.
make me an appointment, and I thought, "Oh, okay." So again, another just sort of another little hint of we can't help you. There's nothing wrong with you. Like, it's you. It's not us, it's you.
Mhm. Yeah.
So for me, I actually finally got my diagnosis in 2007. I got married. I switched insurance, got out of the HMO I was in. I think that was part of the problem because I didn't
Mhm.
fit in their little box. They're
Mhm.
fabulous when you're in their little box, but when you're not, they're not
Yep.
much help. So I got new insurance, got a new doctor. Finally got my diagnosis in 2007. I'd been married about 6 months. So that's a whole other story, getting used to, "Oh, so that's what's wrong," 6 months into being married, but, yeah, and then after that, I mean, it was once I found a doctor that knew, like, "Oh, this is what's wrong," then we uncovered a whole lot of other stuff. I have, Hashimoto's, so I have autoimmune
Mhm.
thyroid, I have IBS, of course, I still
Mhm.
have the chronic daily headaches and migraines and all the other things that go along with, but finally finding a doctor that was like, "Oh, I know what's wrong with you. I studied this. This was my." I actually ended up with somebody that fibromyalgia was actually the thing, like her focus in
Oh,
school.
wow.
So just
Mhm.
randomly picked her, but that was perfect, and
Mhm.
that is when my road started to turn, but yeah, it was a lot getting there.
Yes, yes, and I like what you're saying about your doctors, I think is such an important piece because there's a lot of and I think it's really understandable, like, resentment out there for my doctor doesn't understand this, and my doctor won't talk really talk much about it, and what I tell people is, like, at least you're like, they probably aren't saying it in the best way, no, but, like, at least they're being honest about what they don't know,
Oh,
that
yeah.
it's not in their wheelhouse, because I think sometimes we forget, like, especially like a primary care physician, like literally how much there is to know about the body. Like, it is impossible to expect your doctor. It is not fair to expect your doctor to know everything. And so finding the right doctor, it is a pain in the ass. It is not easy with our medical system. It sucks to do, but ultimately, like, it is far better for you to like figure out how to get to the right doctor versus expect your doctor to go do some research on their own. Like, it's a
Right.
lot to ask. Like, some people are willing to do it. Some people are like, they're willing to learn about certain things because it makes sense for their practice, but, like, most doctors are burned out, most doctors are stuck in the shitty insurance model themselves, they're seeing, like, 30 people a day, like, they're not gonna go research it for you, and, like, if they do, it's probably gonna be some half at like, don't want a doctor that doesn't know what it is, and to go find someone else, and I get that is a hard
Yeah.
thing
It I
sometimes to come to terms with, but
it's so hard, and I think
yeah,
we also need to realize that, I mean, we have to go all the way back to how our doctors were trained.
yes.
So, first of all, the diagnostic criteria for fibromyalgia wasn't published until 1990. So, if your doctor is like, a middle-aged white guy, they probably were trained before there were even diagnostic criteria for fibromyalgia, right? So that would not have ever even been part of their training.
Mhm.
And even if you're seeing somebody now, like, maybe a brand new doctor, at most, fibromyalgia is just part of a larger conversation about chronic pain. They are
Mhm.
not like, they don't go through a week-long class or several-month class on how to treat fibromyalgia. It may be an hour, it may be even just one sentence.
Yeah,
as part of another class.
totally.
So to really like we need to understand that the expectations that we have of our doctors, well, what we're expecting is reasonable from a patient perspective.
Mhm.
It's not reasonable consider the training that our doctors have had.
Very well said. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so for anyone who's like, well, oh my gosh, then how do I find that
Now what?
person? Well, that's why Tami is here because she's
That's
your
right.
person.
There,
Because,
you know, there are
yeah.
people
Oh,
out there who do know.
Christ.
There are some doctors, but just to like put some perspective on it, this is
Yeah.
why you can't just like go to pick a doctor. I mean, I was
Yeah.
lucky to do it that way,
Hmm.
but your average person out there, you're the doctor that you just randomly pick or your primary care or
Hmm.
whoever. You're lucky if they've heard about it. Oh my God. I One of my friends is currently going through nursing school, and in
Hmm.
one of her classes, fibromyalgia was being taught as a psychological disorder,
Mm.
which, folks, it's not, in case you
It
wondered.
it's such an interesting thing where like because I deal a lot with like mind body pain, right? Like,
Yeah.
and I feel like we've really confused the nervous system, which goes through your whole body, and like, yes, the brain's part, right? It's like, but we somehow now I feel like mind body pain, like we forget when we say nervous system, it's literally like, I don't know if anyone's been to the bodies exhibit. Have you been to one of those?
Yes,
It's
Body
so cool.
Works.
Yes.
Yes.
Where like you have the nerve, like where they lay out the whole nervous system, and it's literally in the shape of a body. Like your nervous system is massive. Like when I say nervous system, I'm literally talking about your entire nervous system.
Meaning the nerves that
The
that feel
nerves.
with your little fingertips,
Yeah,
right?
and our brain has an impact on it, but it is completely inaccurate. Like I think if people go back to the earliest episodes, I have like a discussion of like the bottom up and the top down, right? And that we need both. It's mind, body. Like I really feel like in the mind body where this is like a event, the mind body world has just turned into the mind world,
Yes.
and it's
Yeah.
really weird because like they started out strong and I feel like it keeps moving further from that, and it's just become the psychological piece, and like psychological piece meaning like all mindset stuff, and I was like, "What? Wait a minute. We've missed the thing that we walk around in all day, like our body, like our physical body. It's really important."
Exactly. Yes, yes, and our brains are super powerful,
They
right? I
are.
mean, there's the all in your head thing, I like to joke that, well, everything's in your head because if you
And
didn't have a head, like there wouldn't be
I
much going on.
I always tell people people have probably heard this joke like 500 times. I think it's funny. Where it's like if you go to a doctor, we'll just assume it's your white male doctor and he tells you your pain's in the head. You can kick him in the balls and be like, that pain's in your head too. Because
Yes.
technically it is, right? Like I know what it like from a like yes, pain's produced by the brain, but like it's not like I feel like that is so dumbed down and simplified that
Yes.
like
Yes.
it just makes whatever. It's almost like being like a house that's on fire. It's like, well, that's where the one fire started. Well, okay, but now the whole house is on fire. So like we don't
W
just right,
We've
like
got more to fix.
it kind of becomes a pointless sentiment after a while. It's good for people to understand that it's not just the physical location or like where the point where you're touching that hurts, that there's more behind it. But I feel like yeah, we've gone to that, we've gone way too far into the pain is 100% in your brain thing to a point where it is no longer helpful at all. So
Right.
I'm with you,
And
sorry.
your average person is not gonna think their way out of chronic pain, out of
No.
fibromyalgia. Like, there's really things going wrong in your body that we have to fix,
Yeah.
right? And your brain is also super powerful and can
Yes,
help with that.
exactly. I loved the way you said that. Yes. And I think the whole irony, I'm gonna just harp on this even more, of the whole from a mind body perspective, to me, one of the key elements is that we have to be step out of our logical brains and like move down into the body to like what is the nervous system holding on to is such a core component. So the second you're going too analytical, you're usually getting stuck in a cycle that actually only amplifies hypersensitivity of the nervous system and
Yep.
makes it more what you talk about in your book. I love that you bring in the saber-toothed tigers a lot because I talk about that a lot too, of like your brain's always like looking for threat. It's
Mhm.
like we can't it's equivalent to be sitting in a busy highway and being like, "Oh, just teach your brain to calm down that you're totally fine." It's like,
As you're in the middle of the road.
yeah. And your brain's like, but it's not fine. And so like that's often like I feel like very similar for something like fibromyalgia, where there are things happening at a nervous system level, like you said, at a body level, physiological things that are happening that your brain's like, ah. And some of those
Yeah.
things are really valid and need to be impacted. And then there are other things where our brain has taken a story and run with it. And we can
Yep.
help our unconscious rewire that from a different way, but it's both, it's both, it's not either or, and it's not a fight of which one is right. It's just what's going on for you, and there's always both, almost always both.
Mhm. Yeah, there always is. There always is. And I think that there is, it's so funny as we talk about things moving almost too far down to the mind part of the
Mhm.
mind body. We're also like moving in the wrong direction a little bit, because one of the things that I find I need to do with my clients often is to retrain their brains simple things like, hey, you know what, you can set a goal and accomplish it. Right? Like
Yes.
the fact that we get to tick that box off is actually more important than what the task actually was, because
Mhm.
we have to actually retrain our brains. You know what? You can do things. You can
Yes.
accomplish things.
I love that. Can you speak a little bit more about that, or like what you see people coming to? Because I feel like this is really, really important.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So with fibromyalgia, it's like sometimes it's like all of a sudden we were dumped into a body that's not our own, right? And it's like
Mhm.
we're in a stranger in a strange land. And so we still have these expectations for what we should be able to do, but we're in a body that's like, yeah, no. And
Yeah.
so, when I'm working with clients, the last part of our coaching call is always, okay, what do you want to accomplish between now and when we talk again?
Mhm.
And more often than not, I'm helping my clients actually make their goals smaller,
Yes.
because they're thinking about what they could do in the body they used to live in, not the body they have right now today. So it might look something like, oh, I'm going to clean out the garage this weekend. Hmm.
Yeah, right.
I don't know that that's actually realistic, even if you are 100% healthy,
Yeah.
So how do we make that more realistic? And so after a while of these things of, setting goals and then not being able to accomplish it, more because the goals were too big for the body you're living in right now today,
Mhm. Mhm.
um, we start to believe that we can't set them, that we can't make plans, right? Because fibromyalgia is so, you'll have good days and bad days, right? You
Mhm.
never know what you're going to get. And so it can be hard to make plans, but there's things that we can do to make life more predictable and make it so that you can set plans, you can set goals, you can accomplish the things that you want to accomplish. You just might need to break them down more. You might need to have different expectations of what done looks like, right? If you're a perfectionist, you're going to maybe need to tone that down a little bit or do fewer things at 150% like you do everything, right?
Yes.
So there's different ways that that can look, but I'm very conscious when I'm working with clients about the fact that the first thing we have to do is actually like retrain the brain that you can actually accomplish things. So the goal is actually just to complete a goal more than
Mhm.
it is to clean the garage, right? So
Yes.
let's just like break down the boxes that are over in this one corner, right?
Yes. I love this. I think this is such an important piece because I know I personally struggle with this a lot of setting way too big of goals and then royally failing at them and having to reprogram that. And it's still a work in progress because, man, it is. It's a
Because
lot.
life, right?
Like, I know. Yeah, I've gotten better and better at it, but it's always a work in progress.
Yeah.
And people so struggle, and I know this is my big struggle, so maybe I just see a lot of people with the same struggle, is with like, yeah, but if I set the goal so small, then it doesn't feel worth doing.
Mhm.
And this is something where I spend a lot of time with people because it's such a funny thing that gets in our way, and I find that usually there's other beliefs, like, that's just kind of like a not a cop out belief, but it is, like, it's like a protective belief. It's just like kind of the easy one for our brains to grasp onto, but really there's something much deeper going on of why there's resistance into even trying to move towards that specific goal they're trying to set. And that is where like some deep exploration can come into play, and it can be so different for everybody. I'm thinking of one client, for example, who realized that one of the big things that was stopping her was that she never did her grocery shopping. Her husband would do it, and she kept wanting though to walk more and like be out in nature more. And as she was able to go do these like nature hikes more really well and not have any pain, she would then have these like really weird flare-ups that would happen that just like it just didn't make sense, right? It was like there was really no rhyme or reason to it, and it didn't make sense with the amount of activity. And what we uncovered was, well, if he realizes that I'm able to do that, then I'll have to go to the grocery store, and I do not want to have to go to the grocery store. So like
Yeah.
it's almost it's like I don't want to get better because I don't want to have to go to the grocery store. And
Yeah,
so
self-sabotage, right?
yeah, and then we were
And
able to like,
it's
what's behind that, right? It's like you can be like,
yeah.
well, it's such a fascinating thing, and often when we almost don't allow ourselves that exploration because we're like, well, that's ridiculous, or like that's
Yeah, either
silly,
that
yeah.
or we put up a lot of walls of, don't tell me that I made myself sick, right? Because that
Yes.
is also a danger of starting to, talk a little
Mm-hmm.
bit that way is we also have to be careful about not making the patient's fault. It is not
Yes.
your fault that you're
Hmm.
sick. And there might be times where you are self-sabotaging yourself. I mean,
Hmm.
I tell you what, as a kid, I could make myself legitimately sick if I didn't want to do something, like legitimately sick. And that's part of that mind body thing again. Our
Hmm.
brains are powerful. Sometimes we do these things subconsciously, right?
Yes.
Sometimes it's not even like, yeah. I mean, your example with the groceries is such a good one, that just not even knowing that that's what's behind it. So, it's always
Y-
good to explore these things. I
Yeah.
have had clients where anytime there was something big coming up, like, a big event they wanted to go to,
Hmm.
or a deadline in their work, or something like that, they would end up in a flare either
Hmm.
after it happened or before it happened. And you could look at that and say, well, it makes sense. There was a big event, there was a big deadline, you were maybe doing more, maybe not getting as good a sleep, all of those things. But also, like, at some point, you can
Hmm.
change that pattern,
Hmm.
right? And, sometimes we're not aware of it, and that's why we haven't changed the pattern. But
Hmm.
when you become aware of it, like, then it becomes a choice,
Yes,
right?
absolutely. And I think what you spoke about of it, like not feeling like it's your fault, is such an important piece because so often, like to me, things that happen on an unconscious level, even if it's me, I view that or uncover those things. I see it as like such a different, almost like entity, which might sound a little weird, but like to me, it's like a different entity. Like I didn't, like it happened unconsciously. Like it was not. I had to do work to move past like the place where that felt like a self-blame in a harmful way,
Mhm.
because I'm like, well, my unconscious just doesn't like a lot of these things that happen on an unconscious level are created when we are like 3 years old. You know what I
Right.
mean? It's like you didn't have, I don't know, to me, it's pretty hard to like, yell at a 3-year-old and be like, how dare you do this thing that you had absolutely like no understanding of it. So to me, I have a lot of compassion when people have these patterns or I uncover a pattern in myself. And I find it to be really good news. To
Yeah.
me, it's like, it's not a, oh, I caused this. There is an element of like, oh, my unconscious is creating this, but that's awesome news because I can change it. Where if it's something external that's impacting me, then I don't get to change it. And
Right,
so
you
for
can't
any
change what other people think or other people's actions or,
Yes,
yeah.
exactly. So anyone, but I really do. I do need to remind myself of that. There was a period of time where that was really, really hard for me to see that difference
Mhm.
and to not take it as self shame and like, oh my goodness, look, I failed again. Like I was probably the meanest person to myself ever. And so like I get it if you're someone has that feeling of, oh my God, is it my fault? Is there something I did? I'm gonna invite you to explore that and be like, "What if that was actually really good news that it was your I'm doing quote air quotes fault?" One, because chances are it's not like you did that purposely, right? And two, it means you get to shift it. And when things happen on an unconscious level, we're not in conscious awareness of it. You didn't do it on purpose. And so often our mind wants one thing and our body, this is where the body piece is so important, our nervous system is holding something else. And when there's tension between what the two want, right? Let's say the mind wants to get better, but the nervous system is holding on to a story of like, oh my gosh, if I have to go to the grocery store, then I don't know, maybe there's some bad experience that happened at the grocery store. Like this is scary, so I don't want to get better. Right. And we just have to be like, oh wow, there's a part of our body that fears getting better. Let's explore that. What's going on there? That's so fascinating.
Mhm.
Let's like
And so much of
yeah.
that is done in a protective way, right?
Yes.
Like our unconscious, even the self-sabotage is
Mhm.
not done to hurt us,
Mm.
it's done to protect us. And so there is a piece of you somewhere that says, this isn't safe. And so I'm going to do what I need to do. Like the times I made myself sick because I didn't want to do something, it's because that something felt unsafe, right?
Yes,
And so,
exactly.
how do we acknowledge that subconscious, thank you for protecting me. And what do you need to feel safe? How can we change this? I think there's a lot of grace that we need to give ourselves because it's not even self-harm is done
Mhm.
in a way to fix something, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. Yes to grace. Yes to compassion. And of course, you brought this back to Andrea's favorite topic of feeling safe in your system. But I do want to give what I loved about your stuff is how you bring together, you address that side of things, but you're also giving people really practical tips for fibromyalgia specifically. And I think this is really, really important. And so Tammy has a book, Take Back Your Life. If you are listening, I'm holding it up though. And I was just telling her before this started, I was like, I am so impressed by like how much is packed in here. Like to me, it is like truly like it's like a manual that is there's so much like you could probably be with like one chapter and like work on that for the next 3 months as like your goal, like your like one specific focus, because it is jam packed with very actionable things to focus on. And I think there is yes to that's my favorite part is to exploring the subconscious and how do you make your nervous system feel safe and all of that good stuff. But Tammy brings in very important things like if you are not sleeping well, I talk about this with my clients a lot too. It's like, yes, let's explore our inner worlds, but like if you're only sleeping 2 hours a night, like you can't like no amount of inner work is I mean,
Right.
it can affect that, but like you also need to sleep in order to do inner work, right? Like everything is let's also make sure we're addressing the physical things. So I know sleep is one of the big things, but what are your big things that you like to make sure people are addressing specifically with fibromyalgia?
Yeah. So, I mean, the four main symptoms of fibro, poor sleep, brain fog, pain, fatigue. Like, obviously, we need to address all of those,
Mhm.
right? But along with that, another big piece is thyroid and adrenals. I could probably count on one hand the number of people I've met who did not have some issues with thyroid and adrenals. And I would say that the people who take my class probably, I want to say about a third of them discover they have autoimmune thyroid,
Mm-hmm.
just because it's not something that doctors look for or really know how to treat. It's like another one of those things.
Yep.
So that really is a biggie. So when I'm doing, like, if I'm doing a consultation with somebody and kind of trying to give them some new ideas, I always ask everybody if you've had a sleep study.
Mm-hmm.
Fibro sleep has specific problems, and 45% of all fibromyalgia patients have sleep apnea. Now,
Mm-hmm.
that is a huge number. You could like
Yeah.
grab a coin, flip it, yes or no, that's you.
Yeah, that's massive. Yeah.
So everybody with fibromyalgia should have a sleep study, a recent sleep study, like probably, in the last year or two,
Mm-hmm.
unless, if you're newly diagnosed, now is the time. Anyway, so that's a big one. The other thing is, like I said, thyroid and adrenals, and really having somebody that can interpret those labs properly, because there's a big difference between like the general range of
Mm-hmm.
thyroid and like the functional range where you're going to feel the best. And most people look at that broader, wider range. So I could almost bet that, if you're listening, you have had your thyroid tested and they
Mm-hmm.
told you it was fine. And basically, I never believe anybody until I actually see their labs.
Same. Yep.
So those are the two really, really big things that I feel like get missed a lot with
Mm-hmm.
doctors. I feel like, pain, there's a lot of things we can do. And then, energy management, pacing, like there's a lot of work that we would do together to like manage some of these things. But those are really the two things that I think if you're listening and you just want to like do something, I would fight for a sleep study, and I would make sure you get somebody to check your thyroid labs. Beyond that, like I said, we want to really work on all of those symptoms. So we need to work on, how you manage you. That's a big
Mm-hmm.
piece. I kind of think of it like a three-legged stool. There's the actual physical, like what's going wrong in your body that we need to fix, like that sleep study, thyroid labs, all that kind of stuff. There's the lifestyle piece, which is, making sure you get enough sleep and you practice good sleep hygiene and pacing and all of those kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
And then the mindset piece, which is, how do you treat yourself? How do
Yes.
you talk to yourself? How do you think about your illness and the body that you're living in? Are you treating your body as the enemy, or are you trying to work with your body? All of those three things are kind of where my work, like if you could distill it all down, kind of fits into those three things.
Yes, yes, it's so beautifully said. And something I wanted to bring up, because I think that with the sleep and the CPAP, or a lot of times for sleep apnea, they'll
Yep.
give you a CPAP,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And this is another thing that I've noticed kind of in this mind body world, because I tend to attract people who are really like in the more alternative side of things, that there's so much resistance to something like a sleep study or getting a CPAP machine, because it feels like, oh, well, now I'm just like kind of catering to conventional medicine, or now I'm just like, it feels like they're ignoring their body. And so like, I always tell people, like, yes, there are, like, because I do know people who, by addressing, and I know you bring in nutrition as well, like by addressing certain things, you can, there is potential to not no longer need a CPAP machine to like cure sleep apnea. However, when you currently have it, get a CPAP machine so you can sleep and get enough oxygen to your brain. So then you can
Yes.
have the energy to try to do the like the more natural interventions that you want. And then
Right.
you can reassess, right? But like, it's almost like I don't want to build this bridge that'll let me like get to the other side. Instead, I'd rather like keep getting swept downstream over and over and over, right? It's like it's not a cop out if you need to like take a medication that's right for your body, if you need to use a CPAP machine. Like, I've had this conversation so many times with
Hmm.
people, and they've been like, thank you so much for saying it's okay to like take a medication or use this machine. And I'm like, oh my gosh, yes. Like,
Please, please
wow,
do.
like where have we gone? So it's so funny because it's like when I started out like 10 years ago, not longer than that, jeez, 15 years ago, I was always pretty like alternative med, like aunt, my dad's a doctor, and like we always clashed. Like, and I felt like I mean, so much of what I saw were people that were over medicating, taking medications when they didn't need it, right? It's like I saw all of that, so I felt like so much was like, no, you don't need this. Like, here's where we can adjust things, right? Not that that's my place to adjust anything. Obviously, go talk to your doctor, but whatever. That was like my instinct. And now I feel like I'm like talking people into taking meds. I was like, where has this shift come from? Like,
I
it's
know,
so
I know.
funny. And I'm like,
It it's like somehow along the way, we have gotten this idea that it's somehow, like, more virtuous, or we get more
yeah.
gold stars, or we get extra points if we, like, white knuckle it, right? If we,
Mhm.
like, grit our teeth and, like, do it on, caffeine.
Yeah,
Instead
totally.
of actually getting good sleep, or, suffer through the pain instead of actually getting adequate pain management. There are
Yeah,
no gold stars, people.
yeah. Like, this is
It's
your
just,
life.
and I mean, sometimes I think it can help to think of, like, other situations, right? Like, if you broke your leg, right?
Mhm.
Broke your leg in half. You're gonna go have somebody take a look at that, right? You're probably going to even get a cast. You might even take some pain meds.
Yes.
And so fibromyalgia, it might not be as obvious as a
Mhm.
broken bone, but it's still like there's still something wrong that still needs to be fixed,
Mhm.
and it might not mean being off your leg for a certain number of weeks. It might be months or even years, but that idea of giving our bodies space to heal, that's what they were made to do, even with
Yes.
fibromyalgia.
Yeah.
It's just a different timeline. It looks a little bit different. The rules maybe are a little bit different, but
Mhm.
there's so many clients that I talk to, they're like, you need to stay off your body, so to speak, the way you would stay off that broken leg or broken foot or whatever,
Mhm.
or you're going to mess it up more.
Mhm. It's yeah, and it's such I think one of the big important things is the ability to one not take anything too far into one extreme.
Absolutely. Yep.
Right? Like anytime you're feeling like dogmatic or there's just a lot of tension around, like to me, when someone's like gripping, like literally like gripping onto something of like, I will never take meds. I'm like, okay, well, let's explore that. Even if you don't end up like, even if you don't need meds, it's like that's just why is there so much like tension or like I will never be without meds, right? Like there should just be like this flow of like, yeah, I'm taking meds because this is really what my body needs.
It's
Okay.
just a tool.
It's just and if someone says something about taking meds, you're like, "Cool, like, my meds are great for me." Like, there's not that, like to me, when there's this, like, big body reaction of, like, "I'm gonna punch you in the face if you say anything about what I'm doing," I'm like, "You probably want to explore that." There's probably
There's
something
probably
you're
something
holding
there.
on too tightly, and sometimes it doesn't even mean what you're doing shifts, it's just the energy and how you're doing it that might need to shift. But, yeah, there's usually something there.
Mhm.
Um, that is expending energy, that's the thing, because when you're holding on so tightly, even energetically to something, it's exhausting. It means there is something that is gripping in the background in your nervous system. I mean, not that your nerves are muscles, but whatever, you can use the analogy, and it takes up energy.
It
And
does.
so, since so often with fibromyalgia, you see chronic fatigue, it is worth exploring these things, even if it means you're not even changing anything you're doing, because I have seen the shift in energy when people can like let go of what they're holding on to internally because you
Mhm.
literally are freeing up energy. And I think it's
Yes.
so hard to even attempt to comprehend until you've experienced it, because it's like we have no good way of measuring that energy expenditure. I wish we did. Maybe there
Right.
is, but like,
Right. It doesn't show up on your little
no,
step tracker,
does
right?
not does not show up in your calories burned, like on your watch or
Right.
whatever. Like,
But there
not at
is
all.
so much with that. And I'm sure you have talked about this a million times on your podcast, but the difference between the actual pain we feel
Mhm.
and the added, like I
Yes.
call it the drama that we put
Mhm.
on top of it, right? The agony, all the things we make that pain feel. And if we can let go of all of that extra on top, the actual physical pain is a much smaller thing,
Mhm.
and being able to, this is part of that mindset leg of the stool, but it's shifting our mindset from the way I talk about it is shifting our mindset from focusing on our illness to focusing on our healing or our
Mm.
wellness, right? It might look exactly the same,
Mhm.
but saying, "Oh, I can't do that because of my fibromyalgia. Oh, I have to stay home because of
Uh-huh.
my fibromyalgia." That is a very different thing than saying, "I'm choosing not to do that so that I can feel better tomorrow."
Yes. Oh, I love that difference. Yes, yes, yes. That's such a great example of like the energy of why you're doing something. It matters.
Mhm.
Like it matters so much. And it's like if all you take away from this episode is just start to like reflect on like what are those internal words you're saying to yourself? Because it really does make a huge difference. That was such a good
Mhm.
example. And um I think where I didn't finish my point earlier was that it takes some reflecting to be like almost like what's my bias or what's my go-to? Am I someone who like is like I avoid all meds, or am I someone who like maybe takes meds a little like too regular? Like right, like in a way that you're like anticipating and you're taking medications in a way that just it's a don't want to feel any pain type of thing, right? And just by knowing it's like what's your usual response? What's your go-to? And how can I maybe experiment with being a little more flexible with that? And even if it's just a mental or a journaling exercise, it's really interesting on what you can uncover, because I really feel like in all of this, knowing your body, and I think you talk about this really beautifully in your book and you bring this up, it's like knowing what works for you takes that self-reflection, that willingness to do that. Of like, what
Yeah.
truly have I been doing to heal? Because I think a lot of us feel like we're doing all these things. And it kind of goes back to our earlier conversation. It's like not a, like a self, it's not like a blaming thing, but it's like when we really objectively look at what we're doing, we're like, oh, maybe I actually haven't been doing that much. It feels like it is, you are, but that's actually good news.
Right. Right.
Because it's like, oh, here's things I can actually do then, right? And it's just, but it
Yeah.
takes like a being real with ourselves. Or
Mhm.
if you have been like if you objectively have done all these things, then it's kind of noticed. Do they all kind of what I notice are people who really are doing a lot is they tend to be biased in one category, like you said, the stool. So maybe they've done all these things in the medical side, like they're taking the right medications, they've gotten their labs perfected, maybe like nutrition perfected, but the mindset piece is neglected. Or the bias that I see in people is they're doing all these things in their inner world, and like what they're doing in their outer world, like the pacing piece and all of that is completely neglected, right? Like people tend to bias towards what feels most comfortable. No judgment
Mhm.
of that. Me too. I bias towards inner world stuff.
Absolutely.
That's
We all have
that,
things that are like
yes.
easier,
I know. I'm like,
for us to do.
I will sit all day exploring my unconscious because that's so fun. But I know that about myself, so I can call myself
Yeah.
out on like, Andrea, have you actually taken outward action on that? Doing a process is, I mean, it kind of is action, but not you actually need to send the email. Like you can't just like meditate your way to get an answer from someone. Like you got to ask the question, right? Like, and it just takes
Exactly.
that like being willing to like be like, oh, okay, I see where I've neglected this part of the stool. And so I want to bring in that other leg that you said that was so good, of like our relationship with our bodies and how we see our bodies. And you talked about that really beautifully in the book of being able to actually, what did you say? Don't treat it like a donkey. What was that? I was like, what was that line? It was really funny.
Yes, yes.
a work donkey or something. I can't remember now, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you could also think about how most of us treat a printer, right? Like it doesn't work right, and so you like, hit it a few times, or
Yes, I love it.
your donkey's being stubborn, so prod it a little bit in the backside. And it's that we think of our bodies as like this external thing, right? Like
Mhm.
we separate ourselves from our bodies. And there's the real me that's stuck inside this body that doesn't work right. And your body is part of you.
No,
Right?
yes.
If you're gonna hug somebody, you do it with your
Mhm,
arms, right? You talk to
mhm.
somebody on the phone, it's your voice that they hear. My sister passed away years ago,
Mm.
and, it's her physical body that I miss, really.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so we need to embrace that. And I know how hard that can be when you are in a body that doesn't work right, or you feel like your body has betrayed you. I see this a lot in my clients who were athletes before
Mhm.
fibromyalgia, and now, like, what's my identity? I That piece of me is missing. But, like we said before, your body was made to be able to heal itself. You break a bone, you cut yourself, like your body heals. That's what it does. And so your body really wants the same thing that you want,
Mhm,
right? And so
mhm.
are you giving it the things that it needs to be able to heal, right? Are you giving it the building blocks through good nutrition, lots of protein, rest, or are you poking it in the backside like that
Mhm.
donkey, trying to get it to do what you want it to do,
Yep.
right? One of the
Yes.
things that I do in my book, and I do this in my class, of course, I work with a lot of women. So, guys, if you're listening, forgive me for a second here, but I talk about bodies as she, right?
Mhm.
So, when I talk about my body, I talk about her. And recently, my class that I'm teaching right now, one of my students started to, it was in one of her homework assignments. She started to write something about her body being it. And then it was like, I see this dot, dot, dot. And she said, I just realized why you always talk about bodies as her, because
Mm.
by talking about my body as an it, like it's this separate, I don't know. It's completely
Yeah.
separate, non-emotional, like, whatever attachment, but when I talk about her,
Yes.
that's a whole different connection there,
Oh,
right?
I love that. Yeah, that's such a powerful place to even just start to play with. And I think so often, I mean, what I see with chronic pain is that we dissociate out of our bodies because it
Yeah.
feels unsafe to be with them. And so, so much of my work is like helping people become embodied again, finding the safety to be in a body that has pain, that has intense emotions, that is in a certain way. And it's what's so ironic often is like you said, we're like, your body and you want the same things. And so when we stop fighting that and can see that when we actually partner with our bodies and treat our bodies with like respect and as they're like as a part of us, usually get what we want because now we have like to a team that's moving towards it versus like
Yeah.
us like fighting part of it down, which just uses a ton of energy again, is constantly almost like moving you backwards unintentionally.
And it makes
And
it
yeah,
makes you feel unsafe even more, right? Because you're not
yes.
even safe from yourself.
Exactly. Exactly. Yes. I talk about this all the time. Like your poor nervous system is like, oh my God, I'm in this thing that is a giant threat. And so it's just going to be even more hyper vigilant because it's literally within something that has been deemed as unsafe and a threat and that we hate or that we don't like or has done us wrong. And your nervous system has no choice but to reside there. And so it's like almost like if you had to go swim in like a toxic sludge lake, like you would not feel safe. No affirmations are going to help you there, right? You're like, "Oh my god." Versus actually realizing that okay, let me get into clean waters and help my nervous system be like bathing in something that is safe and protective for it.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
talk a lot about body respect versus body love for this reason,
Oh, I like that. Yeah.
because I find body love is a really like it's a great goal and like absolutely like
But it can feel
huge
like
promoter. It feels too
way too
big.
far on the other side of the Grand Canyon, right?
Exactly. Versus it's like just like if we can come into a place of respect, like we don't have to love somebody to respect them. But like if we respect our bodies, we can feed it well, we can go to sleep on time, we can do all these things. And then from a place of respect, then we can like build into the body love. But I love just starting with like respect.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can treat
Yes.
somebody you don't even like with respect, right? Like
That's right. That's right.
there's
One of my podcast guests a few months ago talked about how, she considered her illness as like a teacher,
Mhm.
which I love that too. It's kind of that same idea, right? Like you don't
Yeah.
necessarily even love some of the best teachers maybe that you
Mhm.
ever had, but you're learning from them, you're growing because of them. And, I think most teachers too, most of them we're going to have some respect for as well. So I think you're
Mhm.
absolutely right with that. And that eventually we can get to a place where, it is that self-love, that self-care, but
Mhm.
it having some steps in the middle are important, right? Because we talk
Yes.
about so often, I see people talking about an idealized like place to
Mhm.
be, right?
Mhm.
Like I don't even consider fibromyalgia the enemy anymore,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
But that's like you can't start there.
Totally.
That's the end. That's not the where you start.
Yes.
So I think that that's really important. And it's also why for me my book was really important to have those practical pieces in there because again, like you can't just think your way out of this. You
Mm-mm.
you have to you have to bring that pain level down, increase your energy so that then you can go do some of these other things that are going to help, right?
Yes. Oh my gosh,
So,
yes.
yeah.
Absolutely. And finding that balance between the different things is so important.
Mhm.
Like, where am I in the doing? Where am I in the thinking? Where am I in the mindset? And just knowing. And so that's where I like how you address all of them. And also I just wanted to highlight the yes to the steps towards the goal. Otherwise it wouldn't be a goal if you could just like do it.
Be, right?
Yeah, like, I mean, that's great if you can, but if you can't, then, like, nothing's gone wrong, that's why it's a goal. And I
That's
think
right.
so often we get that confused. It makes sense, and when we put it in other terms of, like, if your goal was to build a house, you wouldn't be upset when they start digging a hole, right? You're like, "Oh, well, that's for the basement to go into." But that's required. But if you showed up that day and started like yelling at the architect because you're like, what do you, or the contractor, whoever builds a house, sorry, whatever. I'm not in that world, right? Being like, what are you doing? I wanted it to be built up, not down, right? Like you would never get anywhere. And yet we do this to ourselves all the time where it's like, oh, how dare I'm just treating myself with respect. I wanted self love. So therefore, let me just shit on myself more. Like, wait a minute. It's like, no, no,
Yeah. Yep.
baby steps. Like, of course, you're not at self love if you're starting from self hatred and resentment. Like, first, let's move to not even neutrality. Neutrality might be too far of a step. It's like, it's got to be these little steps along the way that you allow yourself to take
Mhm.
and celebrate the little wins of when instead of being like, I hate my body, maybe you said I hate your body and then you caught it and you're like, oh, I'm sorry, body. Like, holy shit, massive freaking win.
Absolutely.
Like,
Absolutely.
throw a
Yeah.
freaking party for realizing you said something to your body and then for saying sorry to it. Like, oh my
Mhm.
goodness.
And I think that, we have to recognize, these stages of change, right?
Yes.
Where the first stage is
Mhm.
totally unconscious,
Mhm.
right? You can't do the thing, you're not even aware that there's a thing to do.
Yep.
And then our next stage is we still can't do the thing, but now we're aware, we're conscious of
Yes.
it,
And this is a
right?
painful stage to be in. This is where a
It's
lot of people give up because they're
it's
now they're
the
like, oh my God.
worst.
It's like it literally is the worst.
Yes, yes. I had somebody that was coaching me once years and years ago. She talked about it like being in the middle of the lake. You get
Uh-huh.
to the point where you can't see where you came from, but you also can't see where you're going,
Yeah.
and you're just, like, in the middle of the lake.
And now you're like, "I'm drowning. Great. Thanks a lot. What
Right,
am I
right.
doing? Why did I start this?" Yes,
And
like
if
it
you keep
is yeah.
going, you'll
Mhm.
eventually get better, and
Mhm.
eventually get to the point where it's unconscious and you can do the thing, right?
Yes.
But we forget about those hard stages. We think we go from not doing the thing, not being good at the thing to being good.
It's
And
not.
and that we failed if we can't do it that way. And the other piece to all of this is that we're all wired different, right? Our
Mhm.
personalities are different. The way we approach life is different. What's important to us is different. And
Yes.
so I think that that is also a really key piece to be able to approach our self-management from the perspective of who we are as individuals and our
Yes.
personalities.
And for so many with chronic pain and perfectionism and all that, we don't know who we are, so we don't know what that means, which means it's another place you get to explore. And so I just say that to bring in because I know a lot of people's reaction is like, "But I don't know what I need or want or what I." Of course, that's okay. You
Yeah,
get to learn. You get to do, and
exactly.
chances are you actually probably do more than like again, this is where coaching is so helpful because oftentimes when you start asking specific questions or looking at things in certain ways, you know yourself so much better than you are letting yourself see.
Right. Because we have
It's
all these other voices too, right?
yeah, it's
Like how
just
other people see us isn't always
exactly.
the way that who we really are.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I know you and I talked about this a little bit, but this would be a good time to
Yeah.
tell people. One of the things that I created to kind of help with
Yes.
this
Uh-huh.
is a little quiz
Mhm.
based on psychology to help you uncover your fibromyalgia wellness style. And there's
Nice.
4 different styles. We have the perfectionist, we have the prevailer, which is the person who just kind of like keeps going, right? Who just does the thing. We have the ponderer. I'm married to a ponderer. These are the people who really like think a lot before they take action. Taking
Mhm.
action is hard, but thinking is easy. And then me, I'm the playmaker. If it's not fun, I won't do it.
Love it. Yes.
But knowing that, right, like the
Mhm.
perfectionist, we think about like our fibromyalgia symptoms, the perfectionist is going to end up in a flare, have more pain, more fatigue because they're doing all the things and they're doing them all perfectly, right?
Mhm.
That's not my problem. My problem is that I stay up too late because I'm reading a good book or I spend too long, doing crafts that I might love or, play the guitar too long or whatever it is,
Mhm.
right? But that's how I end up in a flare. And knowing the difference and knowing who you are can really help you know what to watch out for. Right?
Yes.
I also know that if it's not fun, I'm not going to do it. And there's lots of things that are good for you that aren't necessarily fun. So I also have to be very like proactive about, okay, how can I, if it's not fun for me, how do I either make it fun or not do it?
Mhm. I
Make it
love
okay
it.
that I'm not doing it, right?
Totally. Ugh, I love that. Yes, thank you for bringing that up because that sounds like an amazing quiz, and I think will help with that self-reflection so much. We'll put the link in the show notes. It's fibroquiz.com.
Yep. Yep.
Awesome. Yes. And with that, I do want to be respectful of your time. And so I feel like this is a good place to kind of wrap up. But if there's one thing that you wanted everybody with fibromyalgia to know, what would it
Mm.
be?
The first thing is just, I know we kind of started off with some bad news that most doctors out there aren't going to know what to do with you. The big thing I want you to take away is there is so much that can be done to treat fibromyalgia. Even though your doctor may not know, there are people who do know.
Mhm.
And we would love to help you feel better, but absolutely you can feel better than you do today. My fibromyalgia has actually been in remission for many years,
Mm.
and I help people feel better every day. So it is absolutely possible. And that is not a message that we get told very often. Usually it's
Yes.
just the opposite. So, yeah,
Yes, and I was so glad when I, got connected with you because not only does like Tami is like an amazing person to reach out to. She's got a book. I highly recommend it. It really is such a valuable it's such a like a compact but holy crap loaded with information book to get started, but you also you train other coaches. So it's like
I
it's
do.
not like Tammy's just I mean Tammy is one person, but she's she's spreading the information and training all these other coaches to empower them with this knowledge. So it makes it so like so people can actually find coaches to help with their fibromyalgia specifically, which I think is
Absolutely.
so amazing. So where can people, reach out to you or find a coach who's certified by you?
Great question. Great question. So, the easiest way to actually connect is through my podcast website because everything is on there. And
Nice.
that's just fibromyalgiapodcast.com. Of course, you're welcome to join me, listen to my podcast. We're going to
Yes.
have Andrea on here in a little bit. So, that is a great way to connect. But on that page, there is also a resources link. That's where you'll also find the quiz. You can download free copies of my books if you want to email version.
Mm.
And there's also a find a coach link where you can find a coach. And we've got coaches lots of places around the world, lots of different personalities, backgrounds, experience. So I'm sure there will be somebody that will be a fit to you. The only thing that I will add to that is there is the option out there to work with students who are still in training. If you have a very complicated case, if you are very symptomatic, a student might not be your best choice just because they are still learning and they don't have all the experience. It can sometimes be tempting to go with a student because, of course, their rates are less.
Mhm.
But if you do have a more complicated case, I would recommend scheduling with a certified coach because they're just going to have more experience to be able to help you.
Absolutely. I love that, and I love that you have made this available to people because it is so important. So thank you so, so much. And I think like what a testament to like the work you do, the fact that you like built this freaking, company and are training all these people and have this, you know what I mean? Like spreading the information, like that takes a lot of energy. So it's
It
just
you
like a
know, it
testament
is it
to
is a
this work
lot,
in
it is a
itself.
lot. Yes, but, that kinda comes back to what we were saying
Mhm.
about goals. If I had gone from literally being disabled because of my fibromyalgia, there was a
Mhm.
point where I literally could only leave the house once a week. If I had tried to go from that to
Oh
this, having
gosh.
written 2 books, movie, podcast, all the things, right? No way. I don't think I ever would have even started, right? But, like, when I started, I was coaching just a couple of people, and let's be
Mhm.
honest, I did it from my bed. I sat up in bed with my laptop and my headset, and, I figured I could help a couple people an hour or 2 here and there, right? Like,
Mm.
that's where I started, and all of these things come just little bit by little bit, and healing is the same way. It wasn't just, boom, fibro's in remission. It was, "Okay, maybe I need a little bit less of that medication." Not even going off of it, but let's just bring the dose down a little bit. "Oh, you know what? I'm doing a little bit better here, so maybe we'll adjust that one too. Maybe
Mhm.
I don't need this anymore. Oh, maybe I can do a little bit more," right? And so we forget that this is actually how you do it.
Yes,
And I
100%.
so identify with the tortoise and the hare, right? Remember, the tortoise won the race.
Yes.
Right? Just
Yes.
little bit by little bit, baby
Mm.
steps.
So, so good. I feel like I could start talking to you all over again, so I'm not gonna resist. Thank you so much, Tammy, for being on here. Thank you for all the work that you do. And if this resonated with you, go check out her stuff, her podcast, and she's got amazing, amazing resources. So thank you.
Thank you so much.